A gentleman called Elliot Joseph on the YouTube channel asked this question. You seem to use Logic Pro as your only main DAW. Can you maybe explain the differences of using Logic compared to Pro Tools as a media composer?
Absolutely, because what I think this isolates, my humble opinion, is that Logic and Pro Tools have a fundamentally different heartbeat. For Pro Tools, it is the tempo of time. Hours, minutes, seconds, feet, frames. This doesn't change. Whereas Logic, it's measures and beats, or bars and beats. At the heart of it, Logic is a MIDI sequencing package, and Pro Tools is a hard disk recorder and editing system. Now, whilst they both can do both, functions, it's basically like comparing a motorbike to a people carrier. And whilst it is possible to take your kids on the school run on the back of a motorcycle, I wouldn't recommend it. And it's perfectly feasible to get to work in town in a people carrier, but you're unlikely to get there on time. Getting lost in my own metaphor here, I think basically what I'm trying to say is most modern media composers tend to use two systems, Pro Tools and some form of sequencing software, Cubase, Logic, maybe even Digital Performer. At the heart of what we do is a dichotomy. We have to write little pieces of music, or big pieces of music, called cues, that fit into a larger timeline called a reel or a film or a show. These cues all have a little life or a little heartbeat of their own, but they all have to obey the ruler of us all, the timeline. Now for Logic, the beginning of time is always bar 1, or maybe bar -7 if you're being pedantic, but let's just say for argument's sake bar 1. And with Pro Tools, the beginning is always, it's always the beginning, 0 hours, 0 minutes, seconds, frames, etc, etc. So with Logic, bar 1 can start wherever you want, but the beginning is always bar 1. With Pro Tools, you can name a bar number 1, and you can put that number 1 wherever you like, but it isn't the beginning. The beginning is the beginning. The basic problem with programs like Logic is the management of the movie, its dialogue, and any incoming, outcoming cues you've written, or the temp score. And that is that these are all coming from different sources and all need to kind of spot to different points, often way before where your bar 1 is. This is where the headfuck is with Logic. So where dialogue needs to start at, say, bar -400, Logic, well, it just doesn't have a -400 bar to offer you. So most of us pros will use Pro Tools to do the boring task of maintaining the absolute, which is the film, the dialogue, the temp score, and any cues that you have written. With Logic left to look at your individual cues, the little heartbeats. So for me, this means synchronizing Pro Tools to Logic to provide picture, dialogue, temp, and the cues I've already written, which gives me an immediate pragmatic advantage. I bounce cue down and spot it into Tools, then move on to the next cue, safe in the knowledge that if I overlap a previous or incoming cue, I'll hear it. Here's a good example of a sequence where this method of working is great. Here's 2 cues working to cut V1 of the film. You seem to use Logic Pro as your only main DAW. Can you maybe explain the differences of using Logic compared to Pro Tools as a media composer? Absolutely. But then they recut the film and send me cut V2 like this. You seem to use Logic Pro as your only main DAW. Can you maybe explain the differences of using Logic compared to Pro Tools as a media composer? Absolutely. Which is simple, so I basically have to adjust the start point of the second cue. But look what happens. I suddenly find out that these 2 cues that weren't overlapping before, the incoming, the outcoming, are actually in 2 completely different scales and keys. This is technically known in our business as a complete fucking car crash. It's an easy fix, but these things can easily slip through the net if you're not continuously monitoring the realities of real time in real time. By separating your composing work into 2 different DAWs, you isolate the 2 different jobs that we do, which is composing and HOD, H-O-D, head of department. Pro Tools is like your HOD cap, and Logic is like your composer cape. Pro Tools will police you as a composer, deliver to the producer and the director playouts and reviews and reference versions of what you're working on. And finally, it'll deliver to the dub a working file that will effortlessly sync to the timeline. You can do this in Logic, But again, returning to that metaphor, it would be like trying to get a people carrier through the Rotherhithe Tunnel in morning rush hour. So what about these other platforms, you know, the Cubase, the Ableton, the Digital Performer? Actually, Digital Performer is definitely the best software for MIDI composers. Unfortunately, they've decided to use a completely unintelligible language glossary so that, I don't know, you can use it just like a Westerner can use the Tokyo subway. It's kind of completely impossible. Ableton is like a quad bike, save that for the weekend. Cubase is awesome, very similar to Logic, and I'm actually a former Cubase user. And the choice is very, very easy. Basically, if you're an Apple user, use Logic. It's made by Apple and it works with your computer. If you're a PC user, you can't use Logic because it's not available for PC. But also, there is a power user of Cubase who is a PC user, and that's a gentleman called Hans Zimmer. And I don't know, I only know this anecdotally, but I imagine if something pisses him off about that software, he probably gets on the blower and talks to them, and they probably listen. So many people ask me what's the best DAW. Is it Ableton, Cubase, Logic? You know, I don't have an answer for that. The way you make your music is no business of mine.
You know, decide on whatever you want your people carrier to be to take your kids to school. I imagine Sounddust Pendles will recommend Reaper. But how you deliver it is a different matter. So make sure you pack your helmet. Buy yourself a copy of Pro Tools.